Welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast that's all about real conversations for real transformation. I'm your host, Kat Polsinelli, professional speaker, MC, and best-selling international author. Here, we tackle the tough stuff, the mud that we all have found ourselves in. We talk about the pivots, the challenges, and the victories that shape our lives and our businesses. From overcoming trauma and finding your voice to navigating life's unexpected twists, we get raw, honest, and open. You'll hear from inspiring guests who share their stories of resilience, healing, and growth. Whether it's breaking through emotional abuse, embracing self-worth, or thriving in entrepreneurship, you'll find connection, empowerment, and the tools to keep you moving forward. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and get ready for stories that hit home and conversations that make a difference. Let's get real together. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. I have a really interesting twist. For any of you that have been listening to the podcast for quite a long time, you always see me with a guest, and today it's just me. So I've been thinking about doing this for quite a while, and funny enough, I actually had a client that had to cancel their podcast interview, and I thought, you know what? Let's go for it. I'm all here about raw, real, and doing it in the moment. And I have been talking about this for quite a while of having just a few episodes solo where people can send in questions and things that they want to chat about. And that's what I'm going to make the whole conversation about. Now, I obviously don't have those questions today, but don't worry, I can totally be entertaining. I'm Italian, in case you don't know, so I can definitely find things to talk about. But what I really wanted to be able to do today was actually kind of reintroduce myself. So if you're new to the podcast, thank you so much for joining and for listening. If you've been listening for a while, you've probably seen some of the transitions, the redos for the ways that this podcast has been. And so let's start by filling you in. So this podcast was actually originally created when I was running my coaching business. And I thought that I was going to utilize this system to be able to stay in touch with people and bring business in. What I quickly realized was I actually enjoy speaking a lot more than I enjoy coaching one-to-one. So for anyone out there that is newer in their journey or even has been in their journey for a really long time and you're like, this just does not light me up anymore, just know that I have changed several times in my business since I have started. And while it is definitely scary, and while it definitely feels like, oh, people are not going to understand, what I have realized is I get to take all of these abilities and these pieces that I really enjoy and I really love, and I now get to kind of mesh them together in a way that really, truly makes sense for me. So, I'd love to start with a little bit of a background in case you have not been following me. And if you're not, you should be. You can follow me at The Lotus Effect on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. You should definitely check out my YouTube channel as well, unless you're watching it now. And then if you're watching it on there, thank you for following. So let's start with this. Over 5 years ago, I was actually someone that was in the medical field. That's where my background was at. I got into real estate after losing my job over a moral disagreement where my doctor and I did not agree with what he was wanting to charge people after we had already told them something. That completely flipped my world upside down. Now, on top of that component, there was also these other pieces, which was I was still healing from a 10-year domestic abusive relationship that I was only a few years out of. I had just felt like I was getting on my feet. I was in a brand new relationship. I had bought a home and the whole 9 yards when this came crashing down. And at that point in time, it was definitely a decision for me to really look into who I am and where do I actually want to go. And one of the things that I've always really enjoyed, which is one of the reasons why I got into the medical field, was I wanted to help people. I wanted to help other people feel better or make them feel good or help them in the health system. So that was the reason why I chose that role. And funny enough, I had already been thinking about real estate because I was like, I can help people the way I want to. FYI, not exactly how that works. If you've been a realtor, you know if you're thinking about it, make sure you do your research outside of what brokerages tell you. Now, I started my real estate journey just over 5 years ago after I lost my job, jumped into it full force, and I actually did pretty decent. I had 3 clients within the first 3 months of me starting my business, but it is a lot of work. And it was also the first time that I had ever stepped into the entrepreneurial role. Which, by the way, if you've ever stepped into the world of real estate, you don't find a lot of real estate agents that call themselves an entrepreneur or a business owner. We're in real estate. That's what we do. We have a brokering manager that helps make sure that our stuff is done correctly. And so we kind of see it as an in-between from corporate to the entrepreneurial space. Funny enough, I actually didn't learn the term entrepreneur until I decided to get into coaching a couple of years later. Isn't that funny? It's really interesting to see like what you're around and the people that you surround yourself with and how you're constantly learning things that once you're in the field, you're like, oh my gosh, I thought everybody knew this. And then you find out like nobody knew. Or maybe that was just me. So I stepped into this space and I met tons of people. I helped a lot of people buy and sell homes. And what I realized was I was also going through a shift in my personal life at that time. So I decided to join a team so I could have extra support. I ended up selling my house during that time. I broke it off with the person that I was engaged with at that time that I'd been with for almost 5 years. And I decided to start all over with my kids, all over again. And that was a challenge within itself. I still had a lot of healing. I really hadn't super dived into the personal development world. I had learned a little bit about it. I had read a couple of books, such as Codependency No More. If you've never read that, it's a really, really great book. Very easy read, gives amazing breakdowns and suggestions of actual scenarios of things that people have been through. Now, why I didn't relate to all of them, because some of them had to deal with addiction and alcoholism and things like that, I was able to relate to the scenario, which was kind of that light bulb moment for me to realize, oh, well, while I say I am so independent, I don't need anybody, there is a level of codependency, and that actually is something very different than I think what a lot of us tend to see as independent. And so I began my journey down that road and starting over again, put another limit or another not necessarily burden, but just another layer of bricks on top of my healing process, right? And in that process, I quickly realized, being with this team for several months, that this wasn't what I wanted to do either. And it's actually one of the first times that when I jumped into this space and I realized that, I actually sat and started thinking, hmm, I actually like doing this and I like doing this, but I really don't like doing this. How can I combine those things? And lo and behold, I had a couple of conversations with people at my brokerage, and I got picked up to be on the corporate side of the brokerage that I was at the time. And I ended up working with all of the agents, over 250, I think, that we had at the brokerage at the time. I did all the onboarding, I did the tech setup, I did a lot of trainings, and I fell in love with that role. And I realized, oh my gosh, I've been teaching and training for years in every industry that I've been in. This is so much fun. Now, unfortunately, corporate became corporate again. And the role that I originally did take on started to dwindle as they continued to give me additional roles. But I was also what you could say a people pleaser is. I was the yes person. If they needed help, sure, I could totally do that. I knew how to manage my time and how to work with the other people. And so for me, it was really easy to take on a couple of extra things, right? No big deal until it got to the point to where I was drowning in the work that I was doing. And then when I finally decided to reach out for help, nobody was there to be able to support because it didn't make any sense to them. I had already done it for so long. What do you mean? What is the problem? Do you need better time management? Do we need to maybe do this? So I really hindered myself at that point by not knowing how to speak up. But that also meant that I didn't know how to set boundaries for myself at that point in time either. Now, what I will say is, in the journey of real estate, I did have the opportunity to meet my now amazing husband. And so I'm very blessed that that came about. It also taught me to figure out what I do enjoy and what I don't, and then start moving more toward the things that I do so that I could create more of a life that I enjoyed. And so that led into actually coaching with other realtors, helping them in their business, doing time management, production, ops management, things like that. And then that opened this door to what I could coach everybody. And I'm sure you guys have all thought this. And if you haven't, I promise if you're in this space, you are eventually going to have this thought where you just want to help everyone. And so that was the space that I stayed in for a while. And while I did enjoy it, I also realized that I was extremely exhausted by the end of my days. And it started to become, again, kind of like that extra layer of bricks that I was putting on myself that I didn't even realize that I was doing. And so I shifted slightly, decided I would pull out of real estate just a little bit and I would start focusing on coaching a little bit more. But this time I was going to have more of a purpose of what that was. And so I really started focusing on a lot of mindset shifts and sharing my story. So I really started sharing my story of abuse about 5 years ago. And that was as I started kind of healing on my own. And the more that I learned about all of these different healing modalities, the way that the brain works, how the neurons can reprogram themselves, how the beliefs that we have are not necessarily true, and we have the ability to change them. And I just dove in headfirst. I was so excited. And this was the first time that I really felt like I was starting to understand where I had come from, what had happened to me, and where I wanted to go. And when you step into the world of entrepreneurship, you are faced with deciding to deal with your personal traumas and your struggles or going back into corporate. Not to say that people in corporate do not have the ability to see these things, but it is definitely smacked right in front of you when you start your entrepreneurial journey. And you get a lot of things thrown at you. And that's when you realize you're people pleasing. That's when you learn when you have that perfectionism tendency. That's when you learn that you're taking on clients that really do not align with you, but you just want to help everybody. And you're also desperate to make sure that you're making that money. And it was a really interesting time for me to also be able to look back and say, okay, I recognize that this is happening. I recognize that these things are coming out of the woodwork and I feel crazy. And at the same time, where did those come from? Now, not everything that I experienced did come from my abusive relationship. Some of that did come from childhood. And that's just because I was raised to be a strong, independent person that could handle everything. That was also a little hindering as well because I felt like I also had to do it all. And that's, I feel like, where we get into this busy phase that we tend to find ourselves in, where we're working on our business and we're doing all these things, but we're also doing a lot of extra things like checking our email 15 times a day, making sure we're responding to every single person that reaches back out to us, bouncing from one thing to the next instead of being focused on what needs to be completed before moving on. And again, I just think that it's part of things that we go through, things that a lot of us are taught or not taught, but it also tends to be the habits that we picked up as we were growing up or because of the things that we have been through. And so to me, this is actually kind of neat because I felt like I was really starting to learn about me. So if you've ever sat down and done this with yourself, and if you haven't, I highly suggest it. But think about the things, and I would write it down. Think about the things that you do on a regular basis, the things that stress you out, the things that bring you joy, and just look at that list. And then look and see, especially on that list of things you don't like to do, is this something I have to do? Can I delegate it out? Can somebody help me? Could I pay somebody else to be able to do it? Because what you end up doing is you end up creating space. And while that may seem scary, it's actually one of the most wonderful things you have ever had in your life. And I say that because I lived in a time where busy was my life, and that's what I was supposed to do. I went to work, I made sure things were done. I would take shorter lunches if I needed to get things taken care of. I would come home, I'd feel rushed. I'd have to make dinner, I'd have to do all the things. And on the weekends was the only time that I got to relax. What I quickly learned being in the coaching space was that burns you out really quick. And it also can cause so many ailments. If you've listened to any of my podcast episodes, you've probably heard some people talk about autoimmune diseases that they got from burning themselves out because they were constantly in go. People that couldn't even function at their jobs anymore, those that ended up having back problems, hip problems, neck problems, headaches they couldn't get rid of. It really is interesting when you think about the things that we push ourselves through and how our body is screaming at us to slow down. Yet in society, we're never taught that that is something that we can do. And so I started following this psychologist online that I really, really liked. And one of the things that she talked about was this slowing down thing that I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Because if I slow down, that means I'm not doing things, things are not getting done, I'm getting behind, I'm failing as a parent. You name it, I probably thought about it. But what I found was really interesting is what she said was most of us live in a habitual state. So think about this. If you've ever been in your kitchen and you're cleaning the dishes and you're talking with someone and you like forget that you're scrubbing the same dish till you're like, oh, that spot's clean. Okay, let me rinse this off, right? Or have you ever driven down the road and you make a turn and you're like, why did I just turn that way? I thought I was going this way. Your brain is on autopilot. It's in this habitual state that we have learned to create because we, in the present section, can only handle so much. Unfortunately, what has happened is we have learned to live in only that state. And so that state of presence doesn't tend to make it very often. How many times have you gone to somebody's party, done things with your kids, and while you may have like a really faint memory of what that was, it's actually really hard for you to remember the whole thing. Maybe it's hard for you to actually visualize what happened or connect to the emotions that happened in that moment. But you're like, no, I know, we had a good time. The kids were laughing and playing, and I remember we were doing this, but it's just an empty memory. There's not really a connection that's there. That's what happens when we are always in go mode. That's what happens when we don't have the chance to slow down, take a breath, see what's going on around us, pay attention to our senses, and be in that moment. So I was following this psychologist, and one of the things that she said that she did that helped her was she would set random alarms on her clock every single day. She would set different ones. And every time that that alarm would go off, she would have to take 5 minutes. That's it, people. 5 minutes to pause. And what she did during those 5 minutes is she focused on each one of her five senses. So when that timer went off, she would say, okay, what do I see around me? And she would name them off. What do I feel? What am I touching? And she would name it off. What do I taste? What do I smell? And then close her eyes and focus on what she would hear. What's really interesting about that practice is it actually forces the brain to shut up for just a few minutes because it has to focus on what you're asking it to do. It's kind of like a hyper focus moment. But what's really interesting about it is as you start to do it, you start creating a space where you notice when you get in those habitual moments. A lot more than just going through your day and not even realizing that it happened. And so this was one of like the biggest aha moments for me. And I realized, oh oh my gosh, I can sit down and have 5 minutes to myself. And so I started doing that. I make sure at lunch that I make time to at least have 10 minutes because sometimes things get crazy and I understand that. But I schedule out an hour lunch so that I can decide what I need to do in that moment. And that way, a lot of times, if I have 30 minutes, you'll find me sitting out on my back porch eating every time. No phone in my hand, not on a call with anyone, not touching social media, just sitting there in the moment to be. In the beginning, that was one of the weirdest things I feel like I have ever had to do. My brain would go crazy. I wouldn't be able to turn it off. I'd be like, shut up. Or I would find myself scrolling through social media. Like I need to be doing something. Or, oh, maybe I should read a book. Let me just read I'll read a chapter of a book and that'll be my time. No, that's not how it works. You have to learn how to be with yourself so that you can learn to love yourself. And what it also taught me was to pay attention to the thoughts that I was having when I didn't have the opportunity to find something to keep me busy, which then led me to journaling. And I did that for a really long time where these thoughts would come up and I would just write the thought down. And the next thing I know, I'd write another thought down. I'd be like, well, this is stupid. And I would just have a conversation back and forth on the paper until all of a sudden it was 15 minutes later. And I'm like, I don't even know what I wrote. I got 4 pages worth of stuff. And when I went back through that, I was like, oh, wow. I didn't realize I felt that way about myself. Oh, wow. I didn't even realize that I was talking that way. And so what it taught me was how to analyze the inner voice, how to analyze what you hear a lot of people call the subconscious brain to start to better understand me. Now, I'm not saying that this way works for everybody. I am saying that this is what worked for me because unfortunately for me, the several times that I did try therapy just didn't really do it. I got some great books out of it. I learned a little bit, but it really took me making the time to sit with myself to start to understand me. And for a lot of us, myself including, that's a really hard space to sit in, especially when you've had trauma in your life. Which brings me to my backstory. So I spent 10 years in an abusive relationship from the age of 18 to 28. When I got out of that relationship, my boys were 10 and 7. They are now 20 and 17. I am definitely a proud mama, and we have a really great relationship, but it definitely was not without some very hard battles. Even after leaving that relationship, I had to have my ex rearrested for stalking me, for building a shrine in the house that we had been staying in, trying to win me back. And then I continued to deal with that stalking even after the fact, even after fighting in court. This man would send boxes home with my 7-year-old son for birthdays and Valentine's Day with all of my favorite things that came from my son, who was 7. Now, I don't tell you this to bring pity. I tell you it to help you understand. And this is one of the reasons why I share my story. And if you listen to my podcast, it's one of the reasons why you probably hear me talk about it a lot when I'm speaking to my guests. Because even though my guests, most of them, have not been in that kind of a situation, they have experienced traumas in their life, which created beliefs, uncertainties, fears, and the lack to be able to validate themselves. And that's honestly one of the things that this podcast is now all about, is understanding that regardless of what you have been through, I guarantee you there are thought patterns that overlap with the traumas that we have experienced. I guarantee you, you know how to relate to me to some degree, even if you haven't experienced what I have. And as a society, we don't talk about that enough. We don't share how similar we are because we're so busy trying to prove why we are so different. So this podcast was shifted to sharing those stories, to sharing that mud, to sharing the crap that we get stuck in, and figuring out how each one of my guests have been able to move through that so that you as a listener can find connection, can find hope, and can find inspiration in the people that you are hearing. It may be that you hear that person and absolutely love everything that they have to say, or it could be that there's just one thing that they brought up that caught your attention. One thing that you're like, oh, that's what I needed to hear. That is what this podcast is all about. Creating the connection, creating the support, and creating the community that we all are looking for, regardless of our background, regardless of where we live. It's just about creating connection. Now, I talk about my domestic violence very often and very openly because I feel like that, along with other traumas that people have experienced, such as child abuse, elderly abuse, parental abuse, these are things that we need to be discussing because we have all had traumas. And what we don't realize is you walk by people every single day who have invisible scars of the things that they have seen and the things that they have been through that you will never know about. Think about that for a second. I worked in a medical field for over 10 years, and I was in an abusive relationship for 8 of those. Not one person knew what I was going through at home. But the other part of that is not all abuse and not all traumas are physical. And we need to remember that. A lot of the things that we go through, especially as an abuse survivor, tend to be very verbal, very emotional, psychological. For some people, it's financial. They've never laid a hand on them. How do you heal from that? So I challenge you the next time that you're dealing with someone, the next time that you're going through things and somebody cuts you off or pisses you off for whatever reason, maybe just take an extra couple of seconds to say, you know what? I don't know what they're going through. Because they could be having a bad day that has absolutely nothing to do with you. You just happen to be in the path. I know I've done that. And I'm sure if you think about it, you've probably done that too. You've probably had that day where something just has ticked you off and anyone that gets in your way is going to get mowed over. No, maybe just me. Again, what we need to understand as individuals and as a community is we're not as different as we try to make it out. Yes, we all have our own perspectives. Yes, we all have our own backgrounds. Yes, we all have our own traumas and scars that we have been through. And there's a lot of relatability that's in that. There's a lot of things that we have experienced that crisscross. I had the opportunity last night, literally last minute, to speak to a group of social work students at a university. I had a professor that saw me do a panel discussion several weeks ago about interpersonal violence. And he asked a couple of questions at the end of the session as well. We had hosted a huge Q&A. But he came up to me afterwards and he said, "I want you to speak to my students." And I thought, okay, that's awesome. Let's do it. We missed each other a couple times on emails, but last night, last minute, he was like, "Oh my gosh, I have people hopping on. Can you jump on?" You best believe I made space for that. So I got to speak to a group of social work students, those that are going into a field that are going to be faced with other people's traumas on a regular basis, that need to understand what it is like from someone who has been through some of those traumas, and for them to also understand the importance of making sure that they make space to heal their own. A lot of these students are very young. They're where I was between 18 and 20s when I was in my abusive relationship. You're still trying to figure life out. You're still trying to figure out the world. You're still trying to figure out who you are. Although I think I'm still doing that now in my late 30s, but that's a conversation for another time. But it was such a beautiful conversation with these students. I shared a lot of the abuse that I went through. I shared a lot of the physical moments that I had, but also a lot of the psychological, and why, when people are in situations like that, it's so complex when we say, "Why can't you just leave?" Because there's not really one factor that keeps us there. Heck, there's not even two, three, or five. And what a lot of people don't realize is, like I said earlier, not all of it is physical. And for most situations, it doesn't happen in the beginning of that relationship. It takes years and they slowly build up to it. They do these covert narcissistic things that you don't even realize, especially if you have never been taught to create boundaries in your life and have the ability to say no. It's one of the reasons why I fell into that, because I just didn't know. And boundaries weren't really something that was taught. I was just taught to be strong-headed. You would think that'd be boundary enough, but I still wanted to please. I still wanted to be loved. And while, yes, I got plenty of love from my parents, once you get to a certain age, you're looking for that outside love, that fairy tale love that all the movies show us. And so that becomes what we search for. And so, like in my situation, my ex would, what a lot of people call, love bomb me. I didn't realize that that's what it was. I just enjoyed that somebody cared. I just enjoyed that somebody loved my son and took him in. I just enjoyed that somebody saw that my parents were wrong and was on my side. But what I didn't realize was every time that I saw how great he was in that aspect, and he made sure that he made it seem that way, the easier it was for me to fall in love and to trust that he was going to be there for me, and he was going to take care of me, and he was going to do right by me. So by the time I experienced my very first physical piece of abuse, I had already been in that relationship for 3 years. Now imagine the mindset shift when you're slowly pushed away from your friends and family. You're slowly pushed away from people that could tell you differently. You become kind of isolated. But in your brain, it's just that you guys love to spend time together. And that's what happened to me. And by that point, By the time it first happened, I think I was in such a moment of shock that it didn't even register what had happened. And then, of course, there's the crying and apologizing. And if you wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have done that to you. And, we just have to do better. And you're like, okay. And so that becomes a cycle of your life. And so, unfortunately, for a lot of victims, one of the reasons why they stay is because they're constantly fighting with understanding that on one hand, they have all these good things that they have seen happen. They've had great moments. They maybe had great months together. But on the other hand, there's this. But is this as bad as this? Or does the good outweigh the bad? I can't remember. I'm not sure. You want to think positively, so the positive tends to take control, and you're like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't as bad. Maybe that was just a moment. Maybe that was just a couple of days. Maybe that was just a time. Until your brain picks up that it's actually a pattern going on in your life. And so it learns how to be able to deal with that pattern. That then becomes your new normal. And so once you're in a space of normal, once you're in a space of, I know what's going to happen, I know what will happen if this happens, the brain feels safe. It's like, yes, we know the outcomes. We can do this. That's fine. We at least know how to handle it. We know how to push back. We know how to get out of this. But turn around and tell your brain to leave absolutely everything you know and go into the darkness and hope for the best. Do that in any situation. It doesn't have to be abusive. Think of where you are sitting today and think of when you asked for that job promotion and you almost hyperventilated because you're like, oh my God, this is completely brand new. I don't even know if I can do this job. Think about that moment where you decided, I'm going to start my own business. And your body went, oh my God, how do we do this? We've never done it before. There's no way. We're not good at this. We don't have this. There's no certifications. There's been no training. Who's going to listen to us? Now take that same mindset and shift that into someone that is trying to figure out if they should leave or not. Did you know that on average, it takes someone up to 7 times to leave their abuser? I thought that was a really interesting statistic, something I had never thought of. And then it made me think about my relationship, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can count 7, but I definitely know there were several times where I was like, I'm done, I'm leaving. And I instead went back. It is so easy for our brains to choose subconsciously what it deems as safe and what it deems as danger. And depending on what you have gone through in your life, what you have experienced, and what you are currently living in, your brain creates that as its normal. Just know that if there is a small part of you that disagrees with that, listen to it, lean into it, learn about how you could do it differently, start looking up if this is considered something that happens all the time. Do something to break the belief that your brain has created for you. Because unfortunately, our brains are not created to keep us growing and trying all the things. No, it's meant to keep you safe, whatever that safe looks like. Because your subconscious doesn't know right or wrong. It doesn't know good or bad. We, as humans, have deemed that We, as humans, have put definitions on that. The brain doesn't go off that. The brain goes off beliefs, and the brain goes off of past experiences. So think of it this way. If you've ever been in a car accident, and the next time you go to drive and someone does something seemingly close to what had happened before, do you ever tense? Yeah, because your brain took that moment and went, oh, hell no. We don't want to experience that again. And it put it away in a file. And it decided that it was going to keep it there. So if you ever came into a situation that was close to that memory, it was going to put you right back in that spot so that you didn't do it again, or so that your brain could keep you safe. We do this all the time, every day. One of the best things that I ever did in my life was deciding to challenge my own beliefs. So if something came up and my brain went to go one direction and I was like, I just don't know if I agree with that. I started learning to search for the evidence to prove my brain wrong. And then I would build on that evidence so that when my brain would go, oh, but we got to, I'd be like, no, no, because you see, you are saying that this is going to happen. However, that was years ago. And I have all this evidence here that says this is actually what happened. And then this time, this is what happened. And at this time, this is what happened. And that's where I talk about you literally can program the neuron connections. So what your brain believes, you have these connections. They're all connected together. But once you start to tell it something else enough times and prove it, it breaks that neuron and it connects to the new one. This is why you see people that have never decided to work out and all of a sudden they're a bodybuilder. They changed their beliefs. They changed how they saw themselves and they changed what they allowed their brain to think about them and their abilities. This is the reason why I say you always have a choice. If you listen close enough to what your brain is telling you, you always have a choice. You get to choose to believe what it's saying and stay in that loop, or you get to choose to challenge it, break that neuron, and create a new connection. We do it all the time. All the time. It's just a lot of times we don't even realize that we've done it. And so when we get in a space of something that feels really, really hard, we forget that we've already done it, that we've already chose the challenges before, that we've already chose to do something different, that we took a risk at one point in time and we didn't die. We forget that we do that all the time. When you get in a new relationship, you take a risk of loving someone, of knowing someone, of being a part of their life. When you get pregnant, that's another one. That's something you've never experienced before. Again, your brain can go into fear. Oh my gosh, what would happen? How am I going to be as a parent? Do we got to do this? And you prepare, you learn, right? You change. You make the choice that you are going to accomplish your mission, whatever that is, or that you are going to try your hardest. You do it all the time. Think about that the next time that your brain stops you and you know that there's a small part of you that disagrees with it. There's that teeny tiny little piece. Remember that. Choose to challenge your brain. Choose to challenge your beliefs. Because I guarantee you will find out that a lot of things that you thought you believed in was because you heard it from somebody else for so long, you just accepted it. The choice is always yours. I cannot thank you enough for being a part of the podcast today, for listening to my first solo episode. I hope to have more to come. And I would love to invite you that if you really enjoyed this episode, if you feel that you got something out of it, or if you would like to hear more conversations like this, please leave a comment, leave a review, shoot me a DM and say, I would love if you touch base on this. If I get enough interest in stuff like that, we will start having more conversations like this. Why not? Let me leave you with this. I know that you may feel completely alone at times. And I know that there are times where you don't know if you can keep going. I have those moments too. Make the choice. Choose your hard. Choose to challenge how your brain thinks. Don't let it control you. Until next time, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it can make in your life. And I will catch you in the next episode. Mwah. Thank you so much for tuning in to Real Chat with Kat today, where real stories meet real solutions. If you loved today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review on Apple, and share this with someone who may also need to hear this as well. Let's also keep the conversation going. Follow me on socials at The Lotus Effect, connect with our incredible guests, and remember, you are never alone. Your story matters, and you have the ability and the power to rewrite it. You always have a choice. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and keep showing up as the incredible, unstoppable